I think we can start. I will introduce a couple of minutes the symposium once again, and until you start, I'm sure we will have more attendees for your talk. So hello everyone, welcome back to our online symposium, Contemporary Debates on the Ecological Crisis. This is part 2, and we have 2 speakers ahead with another open forum to address your questions and comments. Before we start, I would like to once again share our reasons for organizing this symposium and the importance of ecological activism for the ones who come newly. So this symposium is an act that believes in the potential of changing our perceptions of nature and our role in it, hoping that it leads to understanding our complex and prominent position, and that leads to responsibility. I believe that ecological activism in the streets must be backed by the activism in thought, and the symposium is maybe a trial to become one of them. Yes, it's not physical or loud, yet it shares the aim of shifting our fundamental structures of destruction, this time to conversation, philosophy, and critical thought. And if we go back in the history, we can easily see that today's destructive actions are rooted in the social construction of nature built in the 18th century, maybe earlier, probably earlier, by the ruling elite of Western societies for industrial and capitalistic interests. The prominent view was that nature is outside corporate reality that can be consumed for humans' welfare. And we cannot expect a fundamental transformation without changing this perception. And though we don't like this fact to be true, especially in Europe, that this view on nature is still valid, it is still the prevailing view on nature, mostly in the non-Western societies, and it's dominating all social, political, and industrial structures today with the same methods and same perception. So how do we change this perception was my question. And today I would say that by letting ecological activism pass through in all our works, realities, and discourses, whatever that may be, and it should be in the back of our minds and expressed with care in all possible situations that we're facing a crisis. And to remind the importance of ecological activism, why we should be doing this, is that I would like to say that everything we deeply care about is entangled with ecology and affected by environmental events. So to say immigration, borders, nation states, racism, sexism, neocolonialism, health, access to water, marine biodiversity, clean air, agriculture, distribution of food, famine, animal industry, speciesism, cruelty to the non-privileged, children's rights, feminism, femicide, politics, human rights, ableism, gentrification, social injustices, and the list goes on. So ecology touches and reemerges with everything, whatever cause we care about, although they might seem from just different and distant from each other, they bring us together in facing this crisis. Our cares come together in our fight to transform this crisis with the best possible option. And I believe in the ripple effect. I hope this becomes one of them. Welcome again. So to start with the third talk of the symposium, I would like to introduce the moderator of the third talk is Dorothy Richter. I would like to introduce Dorothy quickly. Professor Dr. Dorothy Richter is the director of the Postgraduate Programme in Curating in ZHdK and the PhD in Practice in Curating with University of Reading, UK. She is also my former teacher and my guide. Thank you, Dorothy, for moderating this talk today. And now I leave the stage to you. Just as a little reminder for attendees to audience, please write your questions in the Q&A. We will address them in the open forum at 3:10 all together, and you can join with video if you would like to ask your own questions. Write video next to your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Gözde. Thanks, Gözde, and it's always such a pleasure to see ex-students doing such great projects. So that's really great. Yeah, and I would like to introduce Yvonne Volkert. We also happen to be in the same PhD colloquium some time ago, I must say, and that's also a pleasure to introduce you, Yvonne. Dr. Yvonne Volkert teaches at Art and Media at the Academy of Art and Design in Basel, where she has led the Swiss National Science Foundation research project Ecodata, Ecomedia, Ecoaesthetics. She co-curated the exhibition and book project Ecovisioners, Art, Architecture and New Media after the Anthropocene. Her most recent publication is Aesthetic Strategies in the Waste-to-Scene, in Hava al-Dubli, Shifting Interfaces, Presence and Relationality in New Media Arts in the early 21st century. Her concerns lie in the modes of how aesthetics, ecology, technology, and feminism come together and bring us in relation to the world. Drawing on her research, ecodata, ecomedia, ecoaesthetics, Volkert will show that an artistic project's transversal potential lies in creating an aesthetic event, providing unexpected relations with our more than human co-beings, and thus affects us to care for them. Very welcome, Yvonne.
Thank you very much, Dorothy, for this introduction, and hello all. I'm really pleased that I can today introduce into our research, and yeah, because I have never done so in the Swiss art scene, so it's a real pleasure. I just will start with sharing the screen. Can you see it? That's maybe my question. And also, can you see the...
Okay, we now see the presentation mode for the presenter. Yeah. So maybe just make full screen, because that does not really work on Zoom.
I don't know how to do it again.
There is one icon on the top where you switch the screens, the display.
It usually is not. Wait
a second. There on the top, there is, like, I think in the middle.
Oh, it's on the bottom, I would say, with a little screen, but yeah, here, exactly there, down there. Oh no.
And now you have to switch the displays. And for that, you have to click this small icon on the top middle, this two papers over each other.
The two squares on the right, on top. Do you see? Up, up, up.
Yes.
Here, up, up, up. Yes, that one. I think it's that one.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Now it's working, huh? Okay. Everything good now?
Yes.
Thank you. Many ecologically active artists today want to sensitize the human audience to what they not know, or what destroys capitalist economic activity, the non-human world. Media technologies and interdisciplinary cooperations with the natural and technical sciences play an essential role and challenge the conventional concept of art. In particular, sensors and the data collected with them are often made the subject of artistic projects, for they have become ubiquitous and make processes that are often beyond human perception tangible in the form of numerical information. Technical sensing, which is essentially recording and measuring, promises to provide relevant data based on verifiable facts. Political and activists' expectations are also linked to this. Especially citizen science projects are driven by the hope that an environmental problem, if it can be proven with collectively collected data, will will be brought into general awareness and can lead to change. The application and aesthetic reuse of technological detection techniques in artistic and communal practices is therefore often touted as a means for a new sensitization and capacity for action in times of climate change. This is all the more so because technology-supported sensing involves the actors effectively, generates their own visual and audio realities, and the sharing and reuse of the collective material enables them to feel a sense of participation in a common cause. This quotation of Brian Holmes is very typical for this kind of approach. So he believes that satellites are to ecological activism what cell phone cameras are to Black Lives Matter. When the cool abstract data of the environmental sciences are adopted and expressed by impassionate individuals and groups, you get the climate justice movement. Spinning the globe with its powerful proxies, the climate movement turns data into knowledge, then it turns knowledge into aesthetic forms, and finally it turns aesthetic forms into action. So I was very critical in the beginning towards this kind of attitude, and I have to say that I also, in the course of our project, which is now in the 4th year, I changed a little bit my attitude. And but what can be said as an opposite opinion to the one of Brian Holmes is that there are also studies that can show that the more information people get about climate change, the more paralyzed they find themselves in this mass of information. So in a certain sense, it's not so, or this general this general opinion of activists who believe that the more information you have, the more you can come into action is not completely true. So something different has to be found, something that affects people. So there's these euphemistic statements, of which Brian Holmes one is an example, prompted me to start this research project. In this project, the role of the technologies in eco-artist projects is examined. This is in my theoretical part, in which I analyze various eco-media projects. And there's also a practice part. And today I also want to speak about this project part. What do media technologies open up with regard to the ecological sensitization of the public? That is one of the main questions, and also this title, this very long title, The Role and Significance of New Media Technologies and Technoscientific Methods in the Arts for the Perception and Awareness of the Ecological, demonstrates a little bit what more than 4 years or 5 years ago, when I wrote the application for this project, what was important for me to think about. You see here the as I said, I have a theoretical part, and in this theoretical part, I will write a monography about the techno-ecoaesthetics of care. And this is also something I try to speak a little bit today. And Markus Meder, Rasa Smita, and Alin Weyer, each one of them developed an individual art work. I will talk about Markus Meders and Rasa Smith's today. The main scientific partner is the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research, WSL. They are based in Spearman staff, and yeah, so they are quite close to us. And another starting point for the project was an elder exhibition project, Sabine Himmelsbach of House of Electronic Arts and Karin Ohlenschläger, Laboral Spain, which we did together. It was about ecomedia, it was called ecomedia, and we were interested how ecomedia techniques become mediators between worlds. You can see it here in this image, which shows a project of Markus Meder, how we define ecomedia. This ecomedia mean they produce hybrid junctions between registering and sensing technologies. Sensing is meant not sending, and the material world like atmosphere, water, and so on. Nevertheless, my thesis for today and also for the book I'm writing is that the transversal potential of artistic project is less to be found in the use of innovative technologies than in aesthetic experiences of coexistence with our fellow beings. In the celebration of an aesthetic surplus, technology would thus be less technology than method, action, aesthetics. In this sense, I also use this term technologies of care. First of all, these are the technical technologies and their possibilities. Beyond that, however, they are also non-technical methods of dealing with what one does not yet know in a relative caring way. Sensing and caring is something palpable, physical, relationship building. Feeling and caring, that is sense. It is a sense and a direction in which we must set out with and without technologies. And care is a very interesting word. It became very prominent now in the course of Corona. And yes, also about this political fact of the care and of the people working in the care sector. And my approach was that I was more thinking about this caring for more than human beings. And care, it means Sorge in German, or Fürsorge, caring for somebody. And as I found out, it's quite similar in the English translation too, where it means trouble and concern. So it has a very ambivalent meaning. And this is what interests me very much. And what I'm interested is that the eco-techno aesthetics of care goes beyond the idea of getting sensibility or of an evolving relation. It is more than that, but it is also deeply rooted in that idea. And this is how also animal theorist Lori Grün defines it. She says care focuses on relationships and the ways in which relationships can be better or worse. So it's an aspect of relationality, of an aesthetics. And she says a care ethics, or I can also add a care aesthetics, is often thought to be just about caring for someone, but it is essentially a relational aesthetics. I go back again. For me, this caring for, nevertheless, is very important. Not so much today in my talk, but in what I'm trying to build in the book. So I write here, it means that I'm affected as a caregiver, as something in a certain sense like a mother, and as a being that cares for the oikos, which is bigger than the whole household or the family, something that which is not only about my own house. This is what I find a very interesting idea, what we can think about. So I go back to the practice part, which is relevant to Markus Meder, Alin Veja, and Rasa Smite. And Markus Meder also, when I approached him to do this research project, he recommended me the WSL and this spot here, which is the Pfienwald in the Central Valley. It's south of Switzerland, and it's a very interesting site because it is for 25 years. Beyond that it's a nature reserve, it's also an outdoor laboratory. And what we can see there is that 50% of the Scott pines tree are already dead because affected by climate change and also earlier by the aluminum industry. Drought is heavy impacting the trees there, and they are dying. Here we can see it's a very rough area. The mountains there have a kind of block, in a certain sense, irrigation. So it's one of the driest spots in the world, in a certain sense. And there are only 3 sites in the world in which data are collected for more than 25 years in such an extreme and rough dry region. So this Pfienwald outdoor laboratory by the WSL, yes, is one of 3 important spots monitoring the effects of climate change, what the effects of climate change have on forests. So we can see here, this is a look into this outdoor laboratory. Here we see the sensors in this research platform. They are every minute they are sensing growth, humidity, yes, different factors which are relevant in a certain sense of the survival of a tree. And here too we can see that in a certain sense, a forest becomes a patient, a being that has constantly be monitored, and which something seems to be struggling for life. So that this is also, it became an important starting point to our research, that we depict forest as a cyborg, as nature culture, as Donna Haraway would say, and it's also a network of relations and agencies, and yeah, with its own reality, which in a certain sense it's a nature reserve, but also a laboratory situation. So I want to begin. This is the work of Markus Meder, and I want to make you listen part of this project. Oh. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, what we hear in this video is it's part of an audio installation into this ecosystem of this Fienwald forest, and he put several microphones into the forest, and he recorded the data there. And he was there when the summer in 2018 was very hot, and he recorded several ecosystems, several spaces which are in reality very located, very far away from each other, maybe 5 kilometers or 500 meters. And so it is 6 different spots of which he recorded the sound. One is of a pond, another of the river, a third of the forest, and so on. And he mixed these together, and he also sonificated this data with data that WSL recorded of humidity, heat, temperature, and so on. And he mixed this together to the sound which we hear. So the what we hear in the end here, what we can immerse into is in a certain sense an artificial ecosystem. It's a situation which in reality is not like this, because everything is much bigger, and the frog which we hear together with the river or with the forest, when we are there, we do not hear this together. So it's really this he could make it by bringing all this together with the recorded digital material. So we enter into this, and we hear a high and also a very deep voice. And this is one of the effects which he generated by the sonification, that the longer we are into this artificial ecosystem, which is an installation, and the more we seem to have the feeling that this is a kind of a voice, the voice of this forest, a ghostly voice. But I mean, it's not that, it's the temperature and the heat especially. And the longer we listen there, the more the sound goes away. And we also do not hear any more than the river floating and so on, because it was one of the most extreme and hottest summer, the summer of 2018. So everything becomes quiet. So this is also one of the sensations this installation provides us with, that we testify in a certain sense aesthetically this high and hot summer 2018 by these different sounds, and also by this elusive ghostly voice. And when we have a look here, we see that in a certain sense, the aesthetics that Markus Meder uses has something of a scientific aesthetics. It goes a little bit against this immersive feeling, against this immersive atmosphere which is created by this kind of generative sound which we hear. So, but this is something he really wanted to have. He did not want to have an overall holistic installation. He wanted to have this gap between this holistic sound and this scientific display. The next work is of Rasa Smith and Raiti Smith, it's called Ecodata Atmospheric Forest. And what for Rasa was very important was that she realized that, and we also have been discussing a lot about this, that if we think about photosynthesis and what trees, what the relationship between trees and breathing beings, then it's really breath. so there is always this kind of relationship. Oh.
Yvonne, we have to a bit speed up.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I made a mistake. Yes, if it's possible, I would like to say a few words to end this. What we have seen here in Rasa Smith's work is that she took also the data that of the WSL, and they found out that nowadays under climate stress, many trees are emitting volatile emissions, very different ones. And it is a very new study, so that we can say it's not as we think only that trees are, that they are those who take over CO2 and all the other emissions which human beings emit in the world. There is in fact also something like a breakdown, and actually they are also giving it back into the atmosphere, and they have an impact also. Trees nowadays, some trees, not every tree, not all trees, also have an impact into the atmosphere. And so she tries to play with this. Rasa Smith, it is a VR reality. And so unlike in Markus Mather's piece, we here have this, and we can make an intimate relationship with a tree, and we feel this emitting of this emission of these toxic particles of the forest. We feel as an event, which is something totally intriguing and immersive. So this is something which is really interesting in this work, because in a certain sense, it has a deep ironic aspect. It is something, it is climate change in action, so to speak. And we are in a close relationship with nature, but we are also in this relationship with consumer technology. So, and also if both work do not adopt in this sense totally an ethics of care, they can trigger this, that we care for what we are into it. There are other works which I'm talking about which have much more this aspect of care, but I think it's also here, it's more in a structural sense that we are affected as caring for those beings we are relating to. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry.
No problem. We started a little late anyway. Thank you, Yvonne and Dorothy. We will have a very, very short break now. And regarding questions to Yvonne, please write your questions in the QA and we will answer them and address them in the open forum at 3:10 after Jose's talk. See you in the second talk after 10-minute break at 2:45.
Okay, I just want to mention that there might be 2 questions about the theoretical background, but we will keep them then to the open forum at
3:10 when we all going to be in the open forum with the audience, and then you can direct your questions. And we see everyone at 2:45 now for the next talk by Dr. Jose Casares' talk, moderated by Dr. Elena Rosoro. Thank you. Hi, Elena. Hi, Jose. Hello. Welcome back to our 4th talk. That will be by Dr. Jose. How do I say your surname, Jose?
Casares.
Casares. Dr. Jose Casares, moderated by Dr. Elena Rosoro. And I would like to introduce Elena briefly again. Dr. Elena Rosoro is coordinator of the Latin American Center at the University of Zurich and postdoctoral researcher. She is also the co-curator of the independent art space La Capsula in Zurich. Hello, Elena. We are a bit in a tight schedule, so I'll leave the stage to you.
Okay, thank you, Gözde. And hello again, everyone. Hello, Jose. How are you? So I will just right away introduce yourself and a little bit of your talk. So Jose Casares is a historian and independent curator engaging with decolonial practice and critical pedagogy. He is interested on collective praxis, and he specifically explores the intersection between nature, history, and decoloniality. He has researched about sexual practices with animals in early modern Zurich and how they influence subjectivities in relation to body, gender, nature, and sexuality. Currently, he holds a postdoctoral teaching and research position at the University of Zurich, where he investigates indigenous thinking about the past and history from a Latin American perspective. And his talk today aims to present some of the fundamental aspects of Mapuche and Andean indigenous epistemologies, and to show how contemporary art has transformed these epistemologies into an artistic decolonial critique to our understanding of nature. And so just very quickly, remember that you can write your questions in the chat, so then we can read them during the open forum, and you can also ask them yourselves through the video. And for that, please write the word video after your written question. And now, Jose, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elena. Hi, everyone. For me, it's good morning, good evening for you already after lunch. I will share my presentation. I have to arrange the big number of small screens that we have, and I am ready to go. Let's start talking about the elephant in the room, at least for me, the title. How do I dare to put the words epistemology and nature next to the terms indigenous and decolonial? Maybe you are not as concerned as I am. I should not be either, because I choose the title, but its wording can cause some concern that I think it's necessary to tackle before we start with today's matter. Epistemology can be understood very quickly as the study of the origin, nature, and limits of human knowledge. When I speak of indigenous epistemologies, I'm trying to appeal to conditions and operations related to the knowledge embedded in indigenous communities. In today's case, as Elena already has said, in Andean and Mapuche communities. Why does this choice of words matter? Epistemology has been a colonial instrument. Philosophy has a clear Eurocentric root, and intellectuals, missionaries, and colonialists have used their understanding of knowledge to repress and marginalize others' ways of knowing. Correspondingly, indigenous ways to understand the world and produce knowledge have been described, depending on the historical frame you choose, as heretic, exotic, uncivilized, esoteric, different, or underdeveloped. Under this line, the word in indigenous epistemologies could be regarded as an oxymoron, or at least as a very difficult concept, but it is not. Why? Now we have arrived to the moment to talk about decolonization, about how to decolonize. As Patricia Purchet has already stated, decolonization is more than a catchphrase. Yes, it is embedded in an intense and somewhat complex theoretical framework. Still, when we take all this theoretical decoration and philosophical argumentation, it should merely mean taking action and changing the colonial structures. With colonial structures, I'm referring to coloniality, the power matrix that constitutes social, economic, and cultural classification and differentiation to permit the control and exploitation of another. My person as a non-Swiss is different, for example, in the Swiss society to other people maybe listening to me today. Probably my person is less underprivileged than an immigrant with a very strict resident permit or without it, or a Black Swiss person dealing with everyday racism in their own country. Or how about the position women find themselves within patriarchy here, there in Switzerland, and here in the global South. I'm talking today from Honduras. And these statements and questions lead to the invariable truth of the power relations our world is based on. Any form of this discrimination, inequalities, or marginalization is caused by the colonial power structures we live in. To decolonize means to take action into these structures and change them. Now, again, when I talk of indigenous epistemologies, it intends to change what Western epistemology usually embraces, intervening and extending it from an indigenous perspective. What about nature? The colonial legacy is not only situated in former colonial territories or their social structures. From the beginning, colonialism and therefore coloniality has included nature as another realm of suppression, appropriation, and extraction. In this regard, the colonial action should aim for an equilibrium, for an equality between human and non-human life as well. From here on, only very shortly, I will use the word nature to refer to the environment and its non-human entities. Again, the goal will be to alter its meaning through the observations and reflections of indigenous epistemologies. Nevertheless, as an historian, I have to admit it's quite challenging to reconstruct indigenous histories and knowledges. Indigenous alphabetic or graphic literacy, oral and performative accounts, material objects and structures were condemned, misunderstood, stolen, or destroyed. Or you see it in the museums, like the last picture, and normally in Western museums. It is because of colonial violence, material and epistemic, that indigenous histories and knowledges are fragmentary, lost, or marginalized today. Nevertheless, indigenous worldviews are connected to a different understanding of history and knowledge. For example, they conceive a juxtaposition between past, present, and future even. Not, for example, in Western history, where history is the past, history is separated from the future and the present. Considering this, I will move today between the past and the present, between historical sources and contemporary art, between theory and practice, to transcend Eurocentric universalism and leave behind, or try to leave behind, human exceptionalism. And the questions that I will tackle today are: how can we understand nature from an indigenous perspective, or what can we learn from indigenous knowledges in our ways to relate with our environment and other living forms? Let's start in the heights of the Andes. I think you already have heard something about this context, but I think I will talk about this from a more historical perspective. As you have already heard, Andean indigenous communities understand earth beings as sentient entities. I will call this today Andean animism, the conception of the natural world animation. It states the world into a multi-relational interdependence based on reciprocity, complementarity, and correspondence. The selves of every being relates sensually with the natural elements and the environment. Simultaneously, animals, plants, objects embrace an integrated relationality with themselves and humans. Although nowadays anthropology and philosophy have made some rearrangements in their ontology idea, imagine the Spanish conquistadors and missionaries hearing such narrations about animism. They were clueless. José da Costa, for example, a Jesuit, wrote in the 16th century, "It is not very important to know what the Indians themselves tell, for what they relate resembles dreams rather than history." Again, this idea, their idea of what knowledge is, what history is. One kind of such encounters of ways to understand the world are the huacas. For example, the mestizo colonial writer Garcilaso de la Vega stated that a huaca could be a site, a stone, an object, a tree, or other landscape elements, a big number of things that we normally separate in a Western conception. Within the epoch's Renaissance philosophical frame, de la Vega described how the huacas possessed an animated nature. Today, we will call it a fluid nature, a fluid character. He continued explaining how they are actors of world events. Although they had a fixed point, for example, a tree, a mountain, they owned a fluid agency between the material and immaterial. Spaniards, on the contrary, described the huaca as idols or heretic shrines. They focused on the huaca's materiality and the actions executed with or in front of them. Still, they didn't understand or try to understand the fluid character of the huacas. Let me explain this with a more specific example. I will say you are familiarized with guinea pigs. You see one here in the picture, the one in the hands of the Inca person, right? But I won't be naming them guinea pigs, but cuis, the original Quechua name. Have you ever thought why they're called guinea pigs if they are from the Andes? Kind of tricky. The Incas gave some huacas, as you see in the pictures, cuis, as offering. Again, a form of relation and respect towards these earth beings. Moreover, the cuis themselves had conombas. That is called representations of animals like llamas, alpacas, or even cuis, as you see in the picture. While the huacas were honored communally and in the public, the conopas were honored and private in the household. This representation has about the same nature as a huaca. It's a fluid nature, meaning it is connected to the animal that represents, and by extension is related to the nature in general. Accordingly, that is not a representation, that is not a stone. It is a kui. It is connected to the animal. From a colonial perspective, kuis were related again to pagan practices, and it was suggested, for example, to the Bishop of Peru to extirpate them totally, to kill all kuis in the Vice Kingdom of Peru. But Juan de Arriaga, a missionary, brought in 1621 how an extirpation of the kuis will be impossible because the numbers increase so much because the indigenous people have special wakas and conopas for it. And you can see in the quote, actually, there was already kuis in Rome when he was writing this. But Arriaga concentrated again on the religious adoration. What he didn't grasp was the connection between the kuis, their conopas, and the wakas, and therefore nature. Every one of them will be treated with respect and thankfulness because they influence the world of the family, the energy of the world, or in this case, animal husbandry. Coming back to the animal itself, again, it's possessed the same fluid connection to the world. As a domesticated animal is not only in a relation towards human benefits, but is to be understood as part of the world. They were social actors that possess agency in the world's balance that in Andean communities saw between auspicious and inauspicious. Humans, mountains, animals, and so on are connected in a social assemblage, blurring the distinction between humans and the non-human, dichotomies between animate and inanimate. Nature is multi-layered, complementary, and reciprocal. As inhabitants of the Anthropocene, we know these fundamentals haven't been the base of extractivist practices in the forests and mountains of the global south. Bears migrate away from the Amazonian forest and reach safety in the heights of La Paz, Bolivia. Such an extraordinary journey of solitary Huajojo, the beard that you are listening, I hope, was the inspiration of Andrés Pereira Paz's installation, Yo Fortifico Sus Columnas. He relates the beard's journey to the contemporary collective trauma of migration and displacement. Pereira Paz strengthens its critique to the violence against ecosystem and indigenous communities through the voice of Poma Dayala, an indigenous chronicler and critique of the colonial system in the 17th century. From his illustration, for example, Pereira Paz borrowed the celestial bodies that you can see in the exhibition. Both bears and stars were source of knowledge in the Inca Empire. The own Poma writes how the ancient Andean philosophers, called Casmacamauta, achieved understanding through the stars, the sun, the moon, the birds, and animals. Correspondingly, for example, he says they knew about the kings of Castile and other nations of the world and their events. He compared these philosophers with Julius Caesar, Aristotle, Cicero, and he claimed, as they declared and wrote about the times and years, the Amauta knew this through science. That was the ability of the Indian. Through their sentient, fluid relation to the environment and their non-human entities, the Andean communities reach other forms of knowledge. Poma's last remark about historical events show how they understood landscape as a significant repository of history, where mountains, stones, and highlands embodied historical actors and events as well. Imagine this, while historiography makes of the environment an object of study, in Andean communities, environment is an actor of historicity. Let's continue this exploration of the landscape as a source of knowledge in Wallmapu, the territory of the Mapuche people. They relate similarly to the landscape and its non-human beings, as it can be seen in the ritual practices by Mapuche machis, central spiritual actors of the Mapuche culture. They see the world through various modalities, strategies, and elements, for example, as objects, ritual dreams, and in relation to the landscape as well. For instance, in 1995, the Machi Francisca Colipi was shocked when a giant boldo tree was cut down and replaced by eucalyptus. She screamed, "Why did you hit that boldo if you knew it had the power of thunder, the knowledge of the forest and the past?" The Mapuche lives in a social relation in a state of mutuality with their environment. They will let native forests untouched and give offerings to the spirit master of the forest, and then they will be permitted to take plants. The native forests that have been at the center of Mapuche life, as the sentence of Colipi shows, have been replaced nowadays with pine and eucalyptus plantations. This does not only change the physical landscape, the objective landscape, but endanger the social, the cultural, and economic livability of the Mapuche as well. In terms of colonial imperative to control indigenous populations, the state and corporate power have changed the Mapuche territories through displacement and extractivism, which will be another way of eliminating the native by eliminating the land and the forest. Therefore, the historical and present loss of their territory is not only an economic issue for the Mapuche, but it is a loss of their histories, of the relation with the spirits living in the forest. Nature, again, is history and knowledge to them. As I have said, the Mapuche lives too in a reciprocal relation with the spirit world that nature is embedded in. It is a sensual and intimate relation to nature through which we could change ourselves. It will blur the normative borders with nature and perceive it as a place to encounter and decolonize our disciplinary, our normative knowledge towards nature itself. Through such experiences, we could bodily and intellectually decolonize our understanding of nature. Vufco, a video work by Mapuche artist Paula Baeza Pailamilla, exemplifies such states of immersion and consciousness through nature. A Mapuche woman narrates a dream she had. Dreams, peuma, are intrinsically embedded in the Mapuche culture as a state of consciousness that allow us to connect with different temporalities, spaces, and knowledges, or kimun, as knowledge and wisdom is not named in Mapudungun, the Mapuche language. The dream reveals to the Mapuche woman knowledge connected to her own corporal sensibility, but to Avufco as well, a spring of great purity and the name of a sacred site in the forest of Chayupen in southern Chile. Water and trees are not only in the service of human necessities, but are teachers, are source of knowledge. The colonial epistemic and material violence has suppressed and is suppressing the ancestral connections to nature and the form of knowledges based on it. My examples today have very shortly tried to show how we could be engaging in an immersive way towards nature and see and feel differently to understand the plurality of knowledge that indigenous communities engage. Accepting, and that is very important, accepting the plurality of knowledge means at the same time we address the partiality of our knowledge. So we don't reproduce a form of marginal epistemology. As Linda Tuivai-Smith has emphasized, an Andean and Mapuche understanding of sociality has shown we have to mutually respect and engage with indigenous knowledge without extracting from these communities. We have seen institutional or state endeavors has shown how knowledge extractivism can be installed to advance towards inclusion, diversity, multiculturalism, or similar concepts that nowadays are used. It is of immense importance, I will say, that we see how Andean and Mapuche understanding of nature teach us to learn from nature through an immersive perception. Every living organism will have something to teach us. Even the eucalyptus used by forest companies to destroy native forests in the south of Chile. The eucalyptus appeared recently in a conference of a project called Valmapo ex situ, between a space of possibilities where humans represent non-human actors. And the non-human beings will reflect their shared history and entanglements. And I will like that we hear what Euca, an eucalyptus, has to say. Through her perception, the performers open a reflection of the eucalyptus, a non-human being, blurring the lines not only of her perception towards nature, but our own as well. You hear the Euca, conflict, loneliness, necessity to communicate with others. It takes, in my opinion, one of the decolonial steps suggested by Suelia Rolnik to active body knowing, at least virtually in this project, the experience of the world in its life condition, whose force produce effects in our living condition. We notice the solitude of the eucalyptus, the necessity to talk about it with other beings, non-human beings or human beings. This exercise permits us to reflect on our current predicament presented by the ecological crisis. Moreover, it allows us to create new forms of social ecologies, a sociality based, taking into consideration the Andean and Mapuche idea of nature, a sociality based on respect and mutuality. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jose. And now, Gözde, should you open the forum?
Yes. Jose, thank you for your talk. It was, I think, wonderful, and also it made very much connection to Yvonne's research in understanding and learning from nature, from a different perspective, but also with Gabriela's talk, where she defends that we should be in the present moment, in the becoming with others. Yeah, in my mind, they all come together. somehow. So now we can start the open forum where we take questions from the audience. But first, Elena, maybe you can address your questions, and then Dorothy, you can address your questions to Yvonne. This is open forum, so everything is like mixed.
Yes, maybe I start, otherwise I will forget the questions, I guess, because there's now this talk in between. Yvonne, are you there? So I want to take up on two different questions in relation to the theoretical background, one from me and one from Matteo. I think I have always difficulty with the idea of essentialism in relation to care, in relation to the idea of mother and so on. So the whole issue of technology of care, I actually would kind of suggest to bring that from the head to the feet a little bit, or from the body to the feet, like neo-Marxist, of course. And I also thought a little bit about Silvia Frederici's work, Caliban and the Witch, Women, the Body and the Primitive Accumulation, which kind of really shows that care work, which is in her understanding kind of embedded in the commons and the struggle for communalism, kind of of course, really very deeply anti-capitalist attitude, that I think really that we have to remember this economic foundation of what we are doing or what we are looking for in the future. Both, here is the also mentioned, of course, the Caliban and the Witch, because the struggle was and is really with violence against these kind of organization and of rethinking economy. So that would be one more claim or proposal I would make. And I don't know if I should go on also to Matthäus, or if you would like to answer that as well first, both of you maybe.
Dorothee, I'm very grateful that you bring in this ecofeminist or care feminist position of Silvia Federici. Maria Mies is another one, and I think both of them relate also to my thinking, and also, like Gözde said, to what José said. I think it's really totally important. My idea of the care was really deeply rooted in this decolonial thinking too, because it is it's definitely the work that is not, it never shows up in the brutal social economy of a state. It's grey work that is done, but it's something that is really totally important, that thing can literally grow and emerge and transform and become something other. So I would say that's one of my theoretical backgrounds, ecofeminism, that I think we definitely, I think that it really changed the discourse also of feminism and of techno-ecofeminism, how I name it. It really changed that now, 20 years later, then in post-structuralist ideas, we can respect and recognize these ideas and see that it's important work that is done, because I think there are usually many people who have problems that I depict care as something positive, because it's still something that is not well respected, and many, sometimes also young women, feel this could be a backlash, this kind of my argumentation.
Yes, that's why I think that has to be connected to economies very, very closely. Because even today, let's say poverty is female, especially single mothers. And of course, you know, anybody with migratory background as well. So I think there are mechanisms that are still ongoing, and one cannot separate that from, you know, the notion of care. Should I also go on to Matteo's mention or questioning of?
Yes. Yes.
Matteo has written, I would like to ask Yvonne on the borders or difference between nature and technology. Do they stand in a dichotomous relationship, or are they complementary or even congruent objects? Do you see it? It's in the Q&A.
Yeah, I didn't see it until now, but I see it now when you read it. Thank you. I don't know if I can say no. I think both are concepts which stem from this dualistic thinking. And I think we have to overcome it. And I think that Jose tried to do it by reminding us when he asks us, what can we learn from indigenous knowledge and their epistemology. Therefore, I also use this term nature cultures, which Donna Haraway, among others, created, and which tries to combine it.
I will say exactly the same. Hearing the question, actually, why we should concentrate if they are dichotomous or not, actually, we have to overcut them. We have, as we were talking about earth beings and the relation between objects and nature and humans, there should be a fluid connection between them. We should not try to separate them. Of course, that needs a new conceptualization, which is tricky, but we have to overcome these dualistic ways of thinking, dichotomies, and dialectic ways of understanding the world.
Yeah.
I also have a question for Yvonne's talk shortly before we switch to maybe Jose's topic. Well, they're interrelated, but I want to ask, what are we when we are in the installation of Markus Meder's work, for example? And it reminded me of the concept of transhumanism, where humans are improved with technology in order to get in new relations with the others, because the artist is using technology in order to understand that. You said, if I go to that part of the forest now, I won't be able to relate in such. What are your thoughts about, like, do you think transhumanism is necessary to create these relationships? But also there's this also ethical questions with transhumanism, especially with who will have access to technology in the future if it becomes a mandatory survival thing. Who will reach the technology? And you know, these ethical questions about transhumanism. Maybe you can
Thank you
comment
very
on
much,
that.
Gözde. I think it's a very important question. I mean, you in your chat, you related it more to Rasa Smita because she's working with VR. So maybe, which is more this innovative or this transhumanist consumer technology. I mean, because what you say, you express a little bit my fears, which I had. When Rasa always said, I want to do a VR work. So I always thought, oh my God, do we really need to be immersed so realistically into this thing? And wouldn't a performance in which we go all together or alone in the forest, wouldn't it do it?
Justice.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is it does not include this work does not exclude that we go additionally to the forest. So I think it's absolutely not a super or transhumanist idea, because it's really about the tree and what we feel it's like sometimes there's like entering the tree, and it is tree and forest as we don't know. It's really something completely different. But knowing that it's a tree, it affects me, and I have to say, since the moment that I have seen it and experienced it, I really experienced being in the forest in a very different way. It's really, really, now we have a lot of snow in Switzerland, in Zurich, and also before there was snow, I every day I go into the forest for more than a year, and I always think how my perception changed, that I really feel, since I know these works, I really experience the forest and the trees as living beings.
I think it's very related to when Jose said bodily active, but bodily active, when we feel things with our bodies and when we relate to things through our bodies, it creates another type of knowledge, and knowing the other, it's completely, am I mistaken, Jose? It's related to active bodily thing you were mentioning, yeah, from another
active
relation.
bodily knowing, yeah.
Maybe only if I can add something, because I couldn't show it. Rasa Smith also made another work, because these volatile emissions, for example, they are also linked to resin. Resin is also one of these materials which are emitted and which are a sign of climate change. So she, for example, like a witch, she is cooking, raising, and working with it. So we have there another approach. Sorry.
I really think that there's already there happened in anthropology, for example, really kind of rethinking of parameters. And I don't know, there was a great book by Heike Behrens, The Becoming Human of an Ape, because the indigenous people she worked with were looking at her as being an ape, and after some years she was recognized as a human being because she could adapt a bit culturally. And I think that are kind of very interesting and new perspectives and so on. Also, I of course like artistic work that deals in a poetic way with the problems, but I really think that will not be enough. And that's kind of really very urgent. If we do not find kind of networks, kind of shared interest networks to stop exploitation and to formulate our urgency, interests, and what we want, it will be very, very difficult. And I think also that affect will also not be enough for that. We have seen how nicely the kind of quickly and the very right wings kind of made use of technology and affect. So we really have to think about other kinds of networks and kind of also look for the benefits of different knowledges. That was also kind of one of the questions that came up when we had this symposium with Ernesto Neto, and a lot of different indigenous people came with him. And I was kind of really skeptical if that's not another takeover from a Western perspective, if one wants to kind of engage with indigenous knowledge. I also think that's, that's also a difficult process we have to be very conscious about. So I said that, and the indigenous people said, oh no, they know very well what they're doing, and that they see that Western knowledge is kind of one column and indigenous knowledges are another column to something that is held through that and is important. But to come back, I want to really say that I think it's a lot of political questions, and in the end, activism will be needed. It will not be enough to write or think or do art about it.
Yes, I think that all the knowledges and approaches and perspectives we're having right now can also be used from the other parties' interests and can be misused, let's say. It's because it's
Already
open to any type of interpretation and usage, and it's already been used for capitalistic and industrial interest with different interpretations. So that's true. Jose wanted to say anything. We also have an attendee joined with the video, but I think Elena has some questions for Jose, maybe. We take them.
May Elena, very quickly, about the knowledge extractivism. When we talk about use, that already means we are understanding a differentiation between object and subject. Someone is making of something an object. When we talk about indigenous epistemologies, and I really hope that I make the point, it's about another kind of collaboration where there is a mutual respect, it's a mutual correspondence between, I don't know, to groups, to communities, to people, to person, whatever. This is the difference, because you are completely right, Dorothy. It's very difficult, and sometimes it's very delicate how to deal with these topics. But if you are, like I was trying to say, very honest and very clear what your intention is with it, I think that will make a difference. And again, like I was saying, and you mentioned very quickly that anthropology has done some progress. Yeah, philosophy as well, as I mentioned. But that decolonizing theory is not enough. Decolonizing is always a practice as well. That is why I try to highlight it's about taking actions. And all these questions that we have, and they are very correct, we have to try to engage with them into a practice. Instead, always making all these very, and I really like, I love theory, but instead to all the time making all these big conceptualizations, try to go into the practice. And then maybe after the practice, we can do another theory again. But I think it's very important that we don't forget practice, action.
Yeah, and in this line, so one of my questions that I think we have already discussed a little bit, but was specifically after the examples that you gave, Jose, and maybe also Yvonne's artistic examples. So maybe can you just go a little bit more into detail about contemporary artistic practices that are related to nature in these terms that we are speaking, and that address or can be thought of as decolonial epistemologies. So what kind of artistic practices are these that you are proposing?
I will say I'm sure my answer will partially answer the question. I can't really say that I will mention every kind of a strategy and modality in artistic contemporary practice. But at least I see two possibilities. One, for example, any decolonizing strategy should try to reconstruct these indigenous knowledges that I mentioned, for example, for the case of Andean and Mapuche communities. I think Dorothy mentioned it as well very quickly, that sometimes artistic practice between the aesthetics and the poetics and the experimental side of artistic practice can find ways to reconstruct this indigenous way, to make us feel maybe our approach to these kind of knowledges. I think that is a way. For example, there's two Mapuche artists. One is called Francisco Guaixequeo. He did a work, Menser Nipeuma, where he shows really the, I don't know, all the difficulties of state colonization in Chile, how the territory has been lost, but at the same time try to put nature in the narrative. And again, we see how nature, the landscape in its case, is an actor. Although all the colonization, he tried to put this history of the land, of the landscape within his aesthetic narrative. Another work that I am thinking, and again, sorry, again, an Mapuche example from Sebastián Calfuqueo. He did a video work called Ser Líquido, being liquid. For example, when we thought normally about territory, we think immediately of land, of soil. And we almost forget always water. In a lot of countries in Latin America and Chile as well, water is a big problem. It has been privatized as crazy. But if we go to indigenous thought, for example, Mapuche, water is territory, it's connected to the history as well. It's a repository of history, it's an actor. And for example, the ocean is connected to the river, to the lake, it's all this fluid territory. When he immersed himself with his body and tried to explore this, and I think we can approach this idea of water being territory through his practice. I think these kind of strategies will one when artists try to go on reconstruct indigenous epistemologies about nature. And the second one, I think Yvonne already mentioned it. Let's get out of our rooms, let's get out of our museums and very beautiful exhibition rooms, and let's go to nature. Let's go feel the tree, feel the soil. For example, I don't know, I have been living very long in Switzerland, and I love walking in the forest, but there are different ways of walking in the forest. One is from the beginning to the end, when, oh, that was a nice walk. And the other one is really appreciating in an immersive way through the forest, where you stop in every, I don't know, a small stone, a little mushroom, a little leaf is in the soil or whatever. I don't know. I took hours in the forest. It's quite tricky as my wife, because I am all the time like hyperventilating, looking all over the place. Well, actually, maybe it's not a very good way to immerse itself in the nature. But I think, for example, I think maybe that we connect to one question that Gözde has. For example, we have been trying, a lot of institutions have been trying to bring nature to the exhibition space and to show these kind of practices that artists deal with nature. I think that is a very good step. But I think if we talk, for example, about participatory critique, when it was about to engage with other communities in the society or in the city, maybe this participatory critique should be engage non-human beings as well, and how we can approach them from an institutional critique perspective. And I think in that regard, a second strategy is really to get out, because every time, I know it's not always the goal of the institution, but every time that we bring nature into the exhibition space, in some way we are objectivizing it. And that is, it's kind of very tricky, and that can be difficult as well.
Yes,
Yeah, I think it's very problematic, your also essentialist notion of nature, because nature, culture is for me always two sides of a coin. And in all respects, theoretically and practically as well. What I also want to say that for me, maybe a difference, I really totally like the conference and I'm really appreciate being part of it, Gözde. But I must say the moment when we had also actually people, indigenous people there, and to speak with them, or to understand a little bit from their narration and from their presence, the knowledge they have or they produce, and I would say we only kind of could be able to grasp minimum, kind of really very little, I guess. That kind of really added something else also, because it was then a network, I would say a network of bodily presence. And that was really great, and that is what I really think, or that would be my understanding of activism, even maybe poetic, artistic activism, that we have to form these networks, you know, as a counterpart to the existing global network of capitalism, of course.
Can I go?
I want
was
to
mentioned
say
that I had an
something.
essentialist idea of nature. I really think I have to tackle this before we continue. I'm so sorry. But Dorothy, I understand how you came to this conclusion, maybe with my very fast talking and answering the other question. But I think in my presentation was pretty clear that the last thing I think is nature, it is essentialist. I think it's well connected to culture, to social economic aspect of our lives, and never say they are separated. Exactly the contrary. I think essentialist idea of nature will be the last thing it should be concluded after my presentation. But I'm trying to understand how you came to this conclusion after my answers, but that is really not the case.
I also want to add something to a point. I know it's critical, and I know it should be handling with care, which is a very common use in the sense, but including non-human entities or beings or their relational situations in an institution is not completely wrong, I would say, from all the research and things, because maybe because I'm partly part of this agency who's doing this type of works or kind of trying to understand them. But at these moments, if taken with care and very ethical, maybe limitations, bringing a non-human entity in an institution can actually evoke certain new ways of relationality. This is a bit different from what you were just talking, but I just wanted to say, should we really say it's completely, let's not completely ditch that and let's not completely do that? Because like recently there was an artist talk again in the Migros Museum by an artist, Melis, and she works with sound engineering and plant. And I actually addressed the question of what her ethical points are in bringing this plant. And she takes care of this plant, which is also, she made sure that it's not unrooted or it's not from endangered species. It is a house plant that she was taking care of, and all the conditions in the institution were done in order for the survival of this plant. It's not objectified. In the end, I still believe technology and these relationships we're trying to build can evoke new communications. But that's what I wanted to add. Let's not completely ditch that possibility, I would say. But we have more questions we can take.
I would invite the attendee, Wana Damir. The person is already in the on the panel. Please switch on your camera and your microphone, and then you could ask your question. Seems not to answer at the moment. So I pick up a question from the chat. Maybe the person will join us later. In the chat, there is a question to Yvonne I would like to pick up first. It's a question from Nezilan Osman. The person writes, really impressive. They are definitely like decoding the language of the nature in order to understand the grammatical structures of it. I wonder if there is any other works you have been done with the data from the ocean, seas, or any water bodies?
I mean, that was my team who did it, and I have to say that they only studied the Pfienwald, so it was only about the forest. But yeah, but maybe if you are interested, but it's more sound-based. Markus Meder also, before he came to our project, he did something about the sap flow in trees. So there you can hear, for example, the drought stress of Scots pine. Maybe that could be interesting for you, but I'm sorry we didn't do more. It's really, yeah.
Thank you. There's the question for Jose from Viviana Gonzalez. Would you like to? I already answered her. I just said so. And there's Jose.
You're muted, Jose.
So many screens, so sorry. Yeah, but I did only answer it partially. That because I went too fast when I talked about Andean communities. this consists in a very large number of different communities. We have Quechua, Aymara, and other communities, and they share some common ideas about nature, but of course there are some difference, and we should approach to the difference or the different aspect how they approach nature. And then on the other side, we have the Mapuche communities that in the south of Chile, and again, some similarities. Of course, we can go in 25 minutes in all the differentiation, and because of that, I'm sorry if it appeared that it was kind of everything the same in a general way, but it is not. There are between the Mapuche people, there are as well different territorial difference that they should be appreciated. For example, the people that live more close to the ocean, to the coast, to the mountains, and there are of course different ways to engage with nature in these different communities.
To me, a question rises. I found very interesting, Jose, that you addressed this idea of what can we learn of indigenous knowledge or of nature or of this eucalyptus tree, for example. And I asked myself, for example, also with regard to our project, which is based in Switzerland, which has a not so transparent colonial history. But what came apparent in a certain sense in your examples, but I think it's also for a lot of contemporary art, it's important if we are thinking about establishing relations towards the more than human, but at the same time there is this deeply colonial history, for example, talking about indigenous knowledge, what can we learn from them, but how can we learn from them so that it's not another appropriation of their knowledge, and so that action can be taken. What could this mean, for example, directly to us living in Europe or in Switzerland and doing art in Switzerland?
Yeah,
my project.
That again brings us to this idea of participation, how we understand participation. And I think the with is very important, participating with, not doing as, for example, I think one really on that I have to be very honest about. For example, one problem right now when we are here all together is the thing that is me, yes, a Chilean, but a person that's living in Europe that is talking about indigenous epistemologies. That is a problem. But for example, if we talk more in how we can engage, for example, in Europe, I know this very interesting. One way is like, that's at least as I see, is that we tried, for example, with one of the artists that I mentioned, Paula Baeza Pailamilla. What we did, it was walk together parallel to the Sil River in the city of Zurich, on how to kind of look at, observe it, experience it together. How she experienced this river, how I experienced the river, how I see the history of this river connected to the city. And I think exactly this this collaboration, this form of collaboration where not only I, as I don't know, as a specialist, because I know something about indigenous epistemology, I bring a curatorial concept. I think we will bring this, but to collaborate with these actors as well, how we can, because at the end, as I see decolonization as well, that we bring these epistemologies of the South and change our context as well, and our sensibilities towards our context are differently constructed. But I think in this kind of collaborations, we can avoid this problem of talking about indigenous epistemologies without respecting where this comes from.
It's interesting what you say, because we had a workshop in our research project, and a media scholar, Yves Sitton, he brought up the idea of extractivism, and maybe extractivism, how he uses it, is in a certain sense, it could be maybe something that is similar to to colonialism, in the sense that you can be colonialist or extractivist also when it's not about mining. But I mean, mining, I learn from others and I mine this idea of them and taking to do my artwork, for example. This is in a certain sense a colonial or extractivist mining operation. So this is how I understand your answer now, that going into diverse modes of cooperation, of aesthetic, developing another sense of aesthetic approach to something can already be deeply decolonial. This is how I understood you.
Yeah, but I will, sorry, highlight very quickly again that yes, this all talk about decolonization, decolonizing, the colonial can be extractivist as well. So this discussion, for example, in Latin America or in other parts of the global South goes very deep. It's because, for example, simply academia is maybe, again, like I say, maybe I am a Latin American person, but I am in a Western university, and a lot of intellectuals bringing these concepts forward. They are in a very good situation and conditions in American universities. And because of that, you are completely right, that the colonizing can be extractivist as well. And because of that, this is really necessary to develop. Again, I know it can sound kind of really normal social tip, but this idea of look for the mutuality, the reciprocity in our collaboration, in our thinking. I think it is really necessary. So we are not extravists, maybe sometimes unconsciously, but really we have to be very aware of that.
Yeah.
I want to make a little note about how I was impressed also from when you said collective. You said collective trauma, or maybe in my mind I'm taking it there, because when I went to the exhibition of Kader Attia in Kunsthaus Zurich, there was this documentary about the colonialism and artifacts and what would happen if the institutions decolonized, you know, this movement. And there was, I can't recall the name, but there was this person in the documentary saying that these countries whose artifacts meant so much to them, because it's not just an artifact in a museum. These artifacts were from their temples, from their religions, from their whole society. It meant something. And when these artifacts were taken from them, it created a collective trauma. And now I come back to what you said about destroying a land, cutting down the trees and putting eucalyptus, because I know eucalyptus grows very fast and it's easy to manage. I think there it was very, very impressive to think about that. It also creates a collective trauma. And someone who comes from Turkey, I see this applied many times in that country, in Turkey, that when state wants to remove, they completely change the whole landscape, that when you go there, there's nothing left from its previous state. And I think it's not about just displacement. There's also this trauma that is created by destroying the landscape, destroying the forest that meant so much for these communities and societies. I think it's something to bring forward, and that we should approach it as a trauma, not just as not just in other terms. We should also, so there's a grief, there's trauma, it's emotional for these people. And bringing it back is not the solution.
I have a very short example to that related to this trauma, onto a question that was, a comment was made that talking about how, for example, in New Zealand, apparently there is this project where plants are renamed. Like, for example, I was talking about the guinea pigs where they are renamed and they come back to the indigenous name. And apparently this project, as I was told, is bottom up, come from the indigenous communities. And for example, when I was with a Mapuche person, a Mapuche artist in the old botanical garden, there is, you will see it, it's called in the Western language, it's called Araucaria, Araucarien in German, and it's one of more central trees for the Mapuche people. But it doesn't say it is actually called Pehuen. And it said, for example, I don't know, it's the Chilean Araucaria. And again, this big name Chilean is like, it's bringing back all the state colonization towards Mapuche people. And she was like, kind of very contradictory sensibility. On the one hand, she was so happy to see a Pehuen. It is so important. She was kind of excited, but then we look at the information table where it's kind of really terrible what everything was saying there, not talking at all about the relevance of this tree for the indigenous community in the south of Chile. And again, it's come all this trauma back that actually the very happy sensation that she had went really away because of all this repetition of this Western discourse about nature, in this case, one tree, called Pehuen in the Mapudungun language.
I mean, Carolina Caicedo, so for example, comes into my mind, who she was part of the first exhibition of at the Migros Museum. And she, for example, I mean, she's not exactly doing this trauma therapy, but she's doing activism and building these networks together with activists, these choreographies, finding aesthetic modes of doing something to overcome this trauma in this river, for example, in Colombia or Brazil. So I think it's very interesting that we have several artworks in this exhibition which really do something, which in a certain sense help to working through it and to heal what has done to landscapes or bodies. Also Tabitha Wies, for example, who is doing these yoga sessions, she's healing these traumatized bodies, less nature bodies, but yeah. So I think it's interesting so to see it is an issue.
Should we continue? We're actually end of our open forum. We're supposed to be in the break now for the ones who are tired, but I guess we have Nuria. Are there any more questions you would like to address? And Gabriela had a question.
Yeah, in the Q&A at the moment, there's only one comment, but maybe as time is we're a bit short in time, maybe Gabriela would like to add.
Yeah, no, I just would like to make a quick comment to both presentations and also the comments and now Jose was making on the tree. It seems to me that one of the issues that has been brought to the fore is the issue of translation, isn't it? It's like who has the right to translate and how and when. So, for example, in the words of like Jose and this disappointment in reading, the story of the tree there in the old botanical garden. Again, it is about like a translation. So there is an ethical, I suppose, and political indeed, gravitas for activists, artists and activists in, dealing with this not possible to be removed role of translator. Whether it is technology creating the bridge between the tree and the people, whether it is the words that basically are written on a plate in order to explain the story of the tree. So I was just curious to hear your thoughts about this, because it seems to me that this is one of the core issues that you were talking about. And the second point, sorry, that I wanted to make is that I hear that there is this whole call on the indigenous knowledge, but I would like to point out that also in Europe there is indigenous knowledge, and Silvia Federici widely talks about it. And that is something that should not be forgotten. Otherwise, again, it's a colonial, perpetrating the colonial performance of us versus them. And even Jose, when he was putting forward the disclaimer that yes, he's in Switzerland, and it is important to position ourselves all the time, but also realize that there is an indigeneity in the land that we are discussing, even in Europe.
I don't know, for example, I would say for the first comment about translation, I will say that it's a very important question, but for example, the case I was mentioning on the guinea pigs is another example. It is not about translating, it's about renaming. And I think that is kind of a colonial strategy, that you completely change the name, and that the word is not more used. It's a different when you try to translate it, and then it's, like you said, an ethical question, how you can approach to translate this word so you can, I don't know, recognize all this knowledge the word is connected to. But at least in this example, or maybe you see translating a different practice, as I
and much more
right
kind of like,
more flexible. In that
fluid,
case,
yeah,
in that case, yes.
As a performance of knowledge and a performance of also feeling, no?
Yeah.
Because as you know, when you translate, it's language is bodily, as words are charged with meanings, no?
Yeah. In that case, I would completely agree about this ethical component, because it is exactly like that. That what does it mean to name something this way, and what are the consequences?
Or perhaps not to name it.
Or not to name it, exactly. On the second, I completely agree with you about not, for example, because it's not the idea to make indigenous knowledge a new universalism. And I know sometimes when for example, I talk sometimes kind of from a barricade, it will come this way, but it's exactly the contrary. That the intent of any decolonization should be that we can talk together, not separated from each other. That Western ideas can be related to indigenous knowledges together at the same height. And I never will say that we really have to kind of marginalize Western ideas or Europe or whatever other alliteration of Occident. But you are completely right that it's necessary not to kind of antagonize in a very radical way, because in other way there is not dialogue. And I think that is another strategy of any decolonial practice, the dialogue.
And another dichotomy presented when you rightly was saying the dichotomy should be overcome.
Exactly. Yeah. No, because of that, you are completely agree that we have to make us aware of that as well. On indigenous knowledges in Europe, yes, completely agree. This is very interesting. I know early modern historian, and because of that, I look at a lot in kind of cultural knowledges in Europe, in Switzerland, on I think how we deal with this concept without antagonizing geographically, using on that kind of geopolitics is a necessary step as well.
Thank you.
I think now we can end the open forum. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yvonne, Jose, Elena, Dorothy, for the part 2 and your wonderful talks. Now we will have a short break and see you at 4:20, I would like to say. Is that correct? Yes, 4:20.
Yes, that's correct.
And we will have 2 more talks by Dr. Marcus Hall and Dr. Pınar Yoldaş, and the final open forum. And I would like to say at the end of the whole symposium, we're gonna have an open conversation with everyone who would like to join. The panelists here, please stay with us, join us, and see you soon. Thank you.
Only one short final comment. There are the question in the Q&A, and please, Jose and Yvonne, if you would like, put your answers there, have a look at them if you would like to.
I answered it already.
Thank you.
Thank you.